Welcome to Untethering Shame, the podcast where we explore the hidden forces of shame, how it shows up in our lives, and how we can break free to step into our most authentic selves. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome a guest whose work is all about empowerment, self-expression, and redefining what it means to be unapologetically yourself. Business coach, Emily Utter. Emily brings over a decade of experience helping entrepreneurs make more sales by leveraging their authentic self-expression as their guide and compass. But Emily's story goes beyond business strategy. She knows firsthand the power of shame and how it silences our gifts. Having been shamed for being too much, too big, too bold, too loud, Emily has transformed what once felt like a limitation into her superpower. Now she helps her clients, often entrepreneurs in taboo or unconventional niches, stand proud in their full identities and step into abundance, unapologetically sharing their gifts with the world. In this episode, we're going to dive into some powerful themes: how shame often takes root in the very areas where we hold our greatest gifts, the performance trap, and how fear drives us to create safety and security in ways that pulls us further from our authentic self, and this idea of shame and our full potential, how with money or with other aspects, we hold back from fully expressing ourselves and therefore receiving at the level at which we want, need, and deserve. Emily will also share insights about the overlap between shame, self-expression, and the fear of not living up to societal or self-imposed ideals. Together, we're going to unpack what it means to let go of fear-driven performance and reclaim our identity in alignment with our values. So go ahead, get settled, turn off all those distractions, and let's dive in. Well, Emily, welcome to the podcast. I am just really feeling this sense of vibrational energy around talking to you today and where I know we're going to go. And I think because of the depth that you really invite people to think about, I'm excited about what we're going to bring to the listeners.
I cannot wait.
When it's interesting, so I always like to start episodes doing one-word check-ins or kind of these soft, lay the foundation. But it's interesting because just before we hit record, you and I were having this conversation around how you and I are going to show up on the podcast. And I love how you kind of went, actually, I think we should just be hitting record right now because how beautiful of an example. And so my big thing on this podcast is if anybody's coming on and they're worried about meeting my expectations and being the perfect guest, it's not a fun conversation for either side, for them or for me. It needs to feel like that you're sitting in the basement with your best friend, just having a good conversation kind of feel. And so I'm bringing this up to Emily, and I'll just kind of toss it to you so you can share kind of how you were connecting this to what we're talking about. Because to me, it was, Emily, I want you to know I trust you. If you go somewhere, I'm going to follow you and I'm going to bring it back and tether it back to the points, the theme. And you have the co-authorship and the right to be able to take this where you want it to go to.
And, we're talking about self-expression today. And when you landed that invitation with me, the very first thing I thought was, oh my God, we need to have this conversation in public, because what you just invited me to do was not censor myself. And that theme of letting go of self-censorship is going to be woven into every single thing that we talk about today. And I just love that we're bringing this kind of behind the scenes conversation forward, because the richness of what's possible in this conversation today has already been cracked open by you essentially giving me permission to show up whatever way that I want to today, to bring the conversation in whatever direction I think either would have a lot of value for your listeners or would be interesting. I mean, I don't know where we're going to go today, but you just couldn't have said a more perfect thing to kind of launch the conversation that we're going to be having about self-expression, because there's so many times, and I think, for many of us, we don't even have the awareness of it, but there's so many times that we are acting in a certain way or speaking in a certain way or even dressing in a certain way for this expected lens of another person.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just really freed me up to, obviously I'm here and I want to deliver an amazing experience for you and for your listeners and anyone who tunes into this. But you've given me this really incredible sense of permission to actually just do whatever feels totally natural and authentic and whatever really wants to come through today.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I like what you just said and kind of bringing in this concept of self-expression and authenticity really being in how we're showing up to our lives. And it can be the clothes that we wear, the things that we say, how we carry our body in a certain interaction. And I think for many of us, we sort of think about this idea of self-expression being this very big thing. And it has to be, I'm so authentic and it's this big dramatic change. But in reality, it's the thing of maybe acting how you actually feel in the world instead of performing and pretending like everything's fine. And if someone asks you, how are you doing? Being able to be honest, or in this instance, being able to say, I don't have to perform to meet someone's expectations to be a worthy guest. I am deserving of
Right.
being in this space. And the thing that came up for me is that I know for me, even now, even decades of doing this work, even if I was on the other side of this and you had said the same thing to me, I would have felt it 90% of the way. And then I still would have had that inner dialogue that's like, yeah, but like, does she really mean it? Is she actually well, what if you do this? And you start to bring in that doubt, which is, as we know, the shame. And so
Right.
I'm curious, as you are bringing this and we're using this example, it feels like the stop points or the limits to self-expression are a both and. Like I gave you maybe the external permission, but you still have to give yourself the internal permission. And until
Right.
we are able to secure both of those, self-expression is something that's often going to be hindered or in some way dismissed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is a practice like anything. And one of the most powerful exercises for me, and actually something I do often with my own clients, is I invite them to track where they are self censoring. And maybe we talk about that a little bit, later in the podcast. But I do want to say something that kind of piqued my attention that you mentioned earlier. You said something around kind of, does the self-expression, I don't know the exact words you used, but it was insinuating that self-expression has to like be big and bold and loud.
Yeah.
And I want to hone in on that for a second, because I think a lot of people misinterpret what self-expression is, because my self-expression is big and bold. It's funny, it's silly, it's loud. But that is not everyone's self-expression. Everybody's self-expression is going to look so different. For some people, it's really soft and sincere or spiritual. For other people, it's very analytical and scientific and backing up everything with data. Everyone has their different way of expressing themselves. Before we even dive more into this conversation, I want to make sure that everybody hears that, because I can't possibly be in a conversation about self-expressing without acknowledging that this really is going to look different for everyone. And honestly, sometimes we don't even know what's natural for us because we have followed societal rules and norms, or maybe you had a certain type of upbringing, or we're in a very strict religion. Everyone has a different background and reason why they originally show up the way that they do. So yeah, I think it's really important to, first of all, just look at these things and become aware of them. And, if you want to give yourself some homework, I'll give you something right now, which is something I assign to my own clients. It's the very first homework in the program I run that's called Express, which is, pretty much all of us have a phone. You might be listening on your phone right now. Open up a notes doc on your phone and just track every single time that you self-censor. So it could be as simple as you go to the cafe, you order your coffee, you really wanted almond milk and they gave you oat milk and you don't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Or, your partner asks you what you want for dinner and you say, "Oh, I don't really care, whatever you want," but that's not true. You're craving pizza. You just can't wait for a pizza. It could be someone apologizes for hurting your feelings and you say, "Oh, it's okay, but you're not okay." So there's these little kind of micro and sometimes macro self-censorship moments that we go through every single day. And so part of it is starting to become aware of it. And,
Mm-hmm.
oh gosh, there's so many different examples. It could be like, have you always dressed in one way, but then you realize you don't feel like yourself dressing like that, or you're ready for a change? I mean, there's just self-expression comes up in every realm of our lives. It could be, you want to paint your room or something. It doesn't matter what it is. But the point is, what I really believe is that it's important to first cultivate that self awareness around maybe where you are self censoring. And then, secondly, start to little by little dip your toe in and start to practice actually self expressing and
Mm-hmm.
speaking your truth, or wearing the thing, or getting your hair done in that way. Or maybe it's skipping the party because you just know you're not going to like it, or you're not going to go to the concert with your friends because you know the music's going to annoy you, or you'd rather go to bed early. It's like all of these little ways that we start to give ourselves permission to be who we are, or maybe in some cases discover who we are, or discover who we have evolved into, because we're always changing as well. And if you're listening to this podcast, I imagine you're probably devoted to your own personal development. So you're not the same person you were 6 months ago or a year ago. So you have to
Yeah.
let that new version of you start to come through and be expressed, and get to know it yourself and let other people get to know it.
Well, and I think what's interesting that you said is that for many people, it's not only just learning to identify when they self censor, but what self censoring can look like for them. Because I feel like I have several clients where the conversation has been, I don't even know who
Yeah.
I am. I don't
Yep.
know. I still think about this one scene in Gilmore Girls where she is like having the mom, Lorelai's having this like identity crisis, and she's like eating all the Pop-Tarts and she's wearing her hair in this very different way. And she's talking to her daughter, and her daughter's like, "Where are all the Pop-Tarts?" And she's like, "I ate them. And I don't even know if I like Pop-Tarts, or if I only eat Pop-Tarts because my mom didn't want me to eat Pop-Tarts." And it's realizing that for most of us, I was able to identify, okay, I self-censor, I can feel that. But I think a lot of times we don't even know why or for how long. And I think the
Yeah.
reality being self-censorship starts as young children, because we're conditioned to live in a world where the expectation is compliance and performance to achieve other people's approval or excitement or love or whatever that is. And if you've been doing that, let's say that you're in your 50s and you've been doing that since you were 4, of course you're not going to know that you're doing it right away, because it's your norm. It's what you've
Yeah.
been doing. And giving yourself space to even explore that, I could imagine that the fear often gets in people's way. And so I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about when you give that initial assignment,
Yeah.
what sort of hesitancy or kind of pain comes up for your clients as they even start to stomach the idea that what they're doing is actually censorship,
Yeah.
and that it is contributing to their pain and distress and all of the other emotions that they have been maybe actively trying to work through and stop experiencing. And now they're realizing that the thing that they'd have to do to stop that is probably one of the scariest things anyone's ever put in front of their face.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting because, I teach the course in the context of business and specifically around content creation. So, my clients are online business owners and they're using, social media to market their businesses. And they're tracking the self censorship in any place in their life. So I've even had clients have marriage breakthroughs because they stopped self-censoring. And listen, I am not a relationship expert by any stretch. And I had another woman who came out to her family about her eating disorder. I mean, like stuff that's totally unrelated to what I was teaching, but I if I look back to kind of what felt like some of the most poignant shifts that I experienced in my clients, it was really twofold. So there would be some kind of new expression that they would start to share with loved ones, people in their lives, but then also how they present themselves publicly. And it's interesting because you mentioned kind of what was the pain point for that. But interestingly, I think part of what made it, I'm not saying it was easy, but easier was that they were going through this process together in community. So, they would come into our Facebook group and say, oh my God, I want to talk about this thing online, but I'm really freaked out. Or they have the post in draft mode and they share the draft in the group, something like that, or bring up a conversation they had at home. So it was all these different things. But I think there's so much power in being witnessed in community because, one of the things about shame is that it has to be witnessed before it can start to be dissipated. And so the interesting thing that would happen inside of our communities during this program would be that my clients were all supporting each other and witnessing each other and just really kind of cheerleading each other. And that fear and that shame would start to dissolve. And so they would feel the confidence while also still being scared and actually go do the thing. So I think that's where a lot of the transformation really happened. But for many of them, it was pretty eye-opening to see how much self-censorship was happening in their lives on a daily basis. These sometimes small inauthenticities, but when they started to look at it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is all over the place. And I do want to say, I think that there's moments where being inauthentic or self-censorship is appropriate, right? It's like, we're rushing out of a store and we just say, yep, we found everything we needed, even if we didn't, It's like there's times, or it's like maybe you just don't want to get into whatever the conversation is going to be. And so you just, you decide it's not important, whatever. There's many, many contexts where I think it's appropriate to just move along. But in this case, what I found was that I knew that it was holding people back. I knew that, specifically for the business owners that I was working with, that given their reliance on social media, their self-censorship and potentially, inauthenticity that was showing up online was preventing them from actually being as successful as they could be.
Yeah. And it's really interesting as you think about that because you hit on the community aspect. When we're performing, when we are censoring ourselves, when we're acting in a way that we perceive others want or based out of fear of how they would react if we didn't, we are simply trying to secure connection and belonging. And we don't realize that we're doing it through this inauthentic or performance-based self. We're just trying to not be rejected. And so when you were in that environment where people are taking these risks together, they're experiencing the lack of rejection. So even though the fear is still there that it could happen on a larger scale, they were able to have these moments of seeing, oh, like this is still scary as fuck. And not everybody just like ran for the door and thought I was crazy or judged me because I wore no makeup on the call that day or something like that. And so as we think about this kind of holding ourselves back, I often think about the bell curve. And I remember when I was starting as a speaker, a big thing for me was I want to have conversations that are often not being had. Now, I understand I occupy, inside of this wellness space, and there's a certain degree of privilege and perspective. I'm in the US, all of those things coming into play. But also this idea that we are sort of constantly talking about how to appease our listeners' anxiety by trying to give them the quickest route to making a change instead of saying, actually, it's going to be really fucking hard. You can do it. And it is an iterative, lifelong process. Like you won't do these 5 steps and suddenly everything feels amazing, but it's much like working out. It never gets easier. What I'm able to do and how I push myself gets bigger, heavier, longer, whatever that is. And so having these really honest conversations around, gosh, my job isn't to quote unquote fix you. That's not how therapy actually works. You're actually not going to feel better all the time. And if you leave every session being like, fuck yeah, I feel great, I'm not doing my job. And so getting to that place and being comfortable, whether that was saying the things I actually thought or going into my personal life, it was this fear of I'm going to go too far outside of the bell curve.
Yeah.
I'm going to be too many standard deviations away from normal. And then what are people going to do? And it's because we have, through our shame, come to the belief that being like everyone else and appeasing people, again, going back to whatever people's backgrounds are, at some point we learned that if we can play a certain part, it's going to be more convenient, better, and then we secure connection, love, belonging, whatnot. We're so afraid that we're going to lose that. And I think it's matched with the belief when you talk about all these gifts or abundance or things that we could have as business owners, as humans, whatever it is, there's also this sort of tethered belief to that of, do I even deserve that? And so that, I think, comes hand in hand with the I need to perform. And if I didn't, gosh, that sounds wonderful to be carefree, but also I'm actually not like this other person. I don't deserve that. I could never be that. And I think that piece of self-confidence really creates this feedback loop into that censorship that makes it really difficult for us to show up in those moments. And when someone says, "How are you?" to be able to say, "Shitty. I'm okay. I don't need anything, but it's been a really hard week and it sucks and I'm overwhelmed," instead of going, "It's fine," and then going about our business.
Yes. And I want to say something that I think could land a little counterintuitive, but you mentioned several times the way that we seek connection. And of course, we're humans, we need this, we need connection. But when we start talking about abundance, it's been my belief and my experience, and this is the part that starts to feel either scary or counterintuitive, is that we spend all this time trying to be a certain way to get a certain type of connection. But what I've seen works even better is actually being more authentic and then seeing what connections naturally arise from the depth of our authenticity. Because I believe there is a real abundance of love, connection, relationships, friendships, opportunities when we express ourselves fully. And listen, not everything is meant for the public eye. Some things are meant to be between you and your therapist, you and your journal, you and a bestie. Not everything belongs on the internet. But the more that we are willing to share who we really are, and again, this might take cultivating to learn who that is, but the more that we're willing to show it, I find the more magnetic that we become. In the context again of business, the more easily money comes to us, clients, because when I'm talking about, for example, the content that a client would put online or that I would put online or that you would put online, there is so much noise. There is so much noise and there's so much vanilla and there's so much that you would never even know who wrote it or who produced it because it all looks the same and sounds the same and it's the same cliches. And so there's a huge advantage to actually standing out and having something to say or something to share that is a bit different. And that's where I really see the abundance coming in at all levels and also what you get to receive. So, I imagine you're the same. I can't imagine you would have chosen your career if you weren't the same, but I love emotional depth. I love having really deep, vulnerable conversations. And the type of relationship, friendship, partnership that can be built inside of those kinds of conversations is so different from those that are based on surface level conversations. And again, there's contexts where we keep it surface level. I'm friends with my butcher, not friends with, but I'm like chummy with my butcher, but I'm not going to go have some big, deep, vulnerable conversation with my butcher. But with a friend, yeah, hell yeah, let's go there. So yeah, there's just so much that can come from, again, our willingness to practice being more of who we are and showing more of who we are and being in the practice of releasing the shame around who we are.
Yeah. And I think a lot about if that self-exploration. So my daughter's going to be 5 and I'm watching this. She's trying on different parts. She sees mostly older kids and she'll try on how they're acting, or, she tries on different styles based on what she sees other people wearing. And you start to see these little parts of her come through as she's exploring. And sometimes it's behavioral, sometimes it's the interests that she has or the things that she does, but you get to witness this. And I go back to thinking about myself at her age. And I think about how by the time I was in elementary and middle school, I already had stories about who I had to be and the
Yeah.
parts about me, the traits about me that weren't okay. Like I have made peace with and forgiven my grandma for this. But one of the things that I still latch onto is when I got a birthday card from her in my preteen years. That was, I can't remember what the book series were, but they were like big giant circle faces with like line drawings. And they were, Mr. So and so and Mrs. So and so.
Oh
And
yeah,
she
I know
gave
those.
me, you remember
Yep.
those? Okay. So she
Yep.
gave me a card with one of those characters on the front. And it was like, happy birthday. And on the inside, it said something to the effect of, most others celebrate with joy, something. But she said, all you want to do is wine, wine, wine. And it was like this idea, the whole card, it was so fucked up, but the whole card was like, I'm dramatic and I'm too emotional. And I
Oh, man.
remember stories about, I can't be too emotional. And so the safety thing is then don't share anything painful that you're going through because then the emotions are going to come up. And so I started censoring what I shared based on the idea they'd have about me, this trait. I was too emotional, or I
Yep.
would not be the first person to talk because you are too loud or you take up too much space. Or I remember when, especially in high school, I was going through a lot and physical contact really grounded my body, but I didn't quite understand why at that point. I didn't even really understand that what I was going through was trauma. And I remember being called a flirt and a tease because I was hugging my friends all the time. Didn't
Mm.
matter their sex, gender identity. I just wanted hugs and connection. And often when we'd be in group gatherings, I'd sit on someone's lap because it felt safer. I wanted to be held, but I would get these things. You're too much. You're too loud. You're too dramatic. You're too flirty. And I feel like those perceptions, I can say now, decades in, I understand that was their own projection of how they
Right.
needed to be, how the world needed to be, but it affected me. And I feel
Yeah.
like I still notice, I've maybe done 95% of the work, but I'll still notice that 5% is so afraid and goes back to me at 5 or 12 or 17 and remember that feeling of being told I'm the problem. And I think, at least to me, what you're describing brings up a necessity to do some inner child healing
Mm.
because if I don't heal that, I'm always going to go back to those points. And the reality is that threat isn't here right now when I'm making that post online. Someone's going to have a problem with what I say, but like that's the online platform. Somebody's always going to be bitching about
Right.
somebody doing something. It's not the
100%.
same, but I feel it because I'm still so tethered to these parts back then. And I know this is something that you've shared that you went through, like being given these messages and
Oh
you
yeah.
did censor. What do you see as the necessary part to do to start to detach from those moments, those experiences, those stories so that the authentic self can show up with a bit less fear about things that aren't even happening in the present moment?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, there's about 6 bazillion things I want to say based on what you just shared. And first of all, I mean, you would know this. I don't know the actual data, but it's like we know that kids change and shift, and even, kids will lose their psychic abilities at like the age of 5 or whatever. They will shift their creativity, or even, I've
Mm-hmm.
seen some of these little like reels on Instagram where you ask like, a 6-year-old to run like a girl and they run really fast. And then you ask a 10-year-old to run like a girl and they're all like floppy and all over the place. Or
Yes.
there was just another study that came out that said like, draw a scientist, and all these little girls drew little girls. But then, all this societal BS gets beaten into everybody. And then if you ask a teenager to draw a scientist, they're going to draw a man. Right. So like even
Mm-hmm.
these messages that you received as a kid that I also received as a kid, children should be seen and not heard. I don't know if you got that one, but I
Oh,
did.
yeah.
Right. So there's all of these little ways that like the sweet little one of who we were just gets chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at. I'm not a parent myself, so I can't imagine what it's like to be a mom and probably be like hypersensitive to make sure you're not messing up your own kid in that way and letting her continue to try on all these different identities. What you said about being too emotional, that's actually one of the things that stood out to me about what you said. I was told the same exact thing, by the way. But what's interesting is like, okay, well, let's look at where you are shining right now. And it's in your work leading this podcast and in your work as a therapist, and you having this deep gift to be able to hold other people in the depth of their emotions. And your ability to go there makes you in part qualified to do what you do. And so this connects perfectly with my theory that I knew we were going to talk about at some point today, which is that it's become, my theory, my belief that for many, if not all of us, our deepest gifts to share with the world are in the exact part of us that was shamed. So yours about being too emotional, to this, to that, and then your work of being able to go to these emotional depths with people and the trauma that you experience, then being able to support your own patients through, transforming their own experiences. In my case, it looks like me now being this leader in the space of self-expression after having been told that I wanted to be the center of attention and I was too big and too loud and too bold and just like, you can't walk into a room and not notice me. It's just like I'm too much of everything, too loud, talk too much, all this. And then it turns out that it's actually my gift to transmit this to other people. And sometimes I'm doing it intentionally. And by the way, I actually feel shame saying that. I'm just going to name that because of what this podcast is about. It's like, I'm saying this and I'm like, oh my God, do I sound cocky? Do I sound like I have an ego? Am I thinking too highly of myself and saying that I have this gift? And it's crazy, right? It's like, it's so tricky, these voices that we have in our head, but the feedback that I get from my friends, the feedback that I get from my clients validates what I'm saying, which and how funny that I feel like I have to validate and like prove and give you guys data right now. Like, give me a break. But it's like, oh my gosh, this thing that I thought was so wrong with me turns out to be the thing that people want more of from me because it gives them permission. And even, another aspect where this has shown up for me is kind of in the origin story of how I started this business, which was, I did have a consulting business. Then I went back and got a job and I ended up getting fired from that job. And I think partly why I got fired was because they could tell I wasn't like totally in it. Like, I loved the work, but as far as like the rules around when to show up, and I was always late. Like, I just didn't give a shit. I was like, I'm going to do my job my way. It's like the mindset of an entrepreneur. But I remember I had just absolute heaps of shame about the fact that I could not just do a 9 to 5 like everybody else. And I remember my coworker, Allison, and I highly doubt she'll ever hear this podcast, but I remember one day just bawling to her in the conference room at work and being like, I just can't do this. And, she was trying to encourage me, like, you just come to work, you do your job, you go home, you go to the gym, you eat dinner and you do the same thing the next day. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't, like, this just doesn't work for me. So I ended up getting fired and I had so much freaking shame. And I remember everyone was always telling me, like, before I got fired, they were like, be grateful you have a job, because I would complain about it. And it made me feel like shit. I was like, what the hell is wrong with me that I can't just be grateful I have a job? Unemployment's high. I should be grateful. I'm doing work I care about. What the heck is wrong with me? But I had dreams of like traveling the world and working from anywhere. And as the universe would have it, or spirit or God, or whatever you want to say, when I started my coaching company, I actually taught people how to leave the 9 to 5 and start a business. And I was very successful very quickly. So it's like, oh my gosh, here it is again. This thing that I was shamed for by the people in my life, which was wanting this freedom lifestyle, not wanting to have to commute to a freaking office, that part of me that was so strong ended up being the thing that other people wanted from me, that they wanted to pay me to learn how they could do the same thing. And this has continued to be true in my business time and time again. And it's been true with my clients as well. It's like the more that they let themselves just live inside of that gift and start to untangle and release that shame, the more powerful that they become. And, you asked me about kind of like, what are the things people can do? I mean, of course, some of this work probably does need to be done in therapy. You mentioned the inner child healing. I really strongly believe in mentorship and being supported inside of communities, because I've seen it work so well for me and for the people that I work with. It's a brave path, but it's also, I think, extremely rewarding. And I don't want to pretend that like, oh, it's just easy. Just one day you just start self-expressing. But I think it starts with awareness and the decision to just be in the practice of it.
I really want to pause because I think it's important. I've done this on the show before, but I think this is the first time a guest has come on and been willing to take the vulnerability risk to do the same thing, which is that saying and claiming something out loud and then at the same time sharing what that inner dialogue is and the shame that's coming up. And so I'm just really grateful that you did that, because I think what it does is it reinforces, like, at its core, shame is simply trying to protect you. It is trying to make sure that you can secure connection and belonging. It's not, I mean, it doesn't feel good to experience it, but it serves a role. It plays a part. And so when people are like, I just got to stop feeling this, I don't ever want to feel these things, I want my life to feel joy all the time, that's not an achievable goal. And so your shame is still running in the background because it's like, but like, I also want to keep you safe and I want to make sure that nothing bad happens to you. And so that's so normal that it still pops up. And usually, at least for me now, when I get that, it's typically that same thing, that I'm staking claim on something that I spent years feeling like I wasn't allowed to, or would make me be perceived in a certain way. And it's going, hey, shame, thanks for holding space and coming in and saying, I'm worried about you. Gosh, right now I'm just on a podcast saying that I'm good at what I do. And I don't need to quantify that. I don't need to validate it. I'm allowed to feel empowered and excited about something I've worked really fucking hard to do. So you know what? Like, I might need you at some point. Now it's just not a time. You don't have to protect me from anything. And so I love that you brought that up. I think what I really took from what you just said, and I think something I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, is noticing. I watched this one parent with their child when my daughter first started doing outdoor soccer and t-ball and all the things that little kids do. And it was 3 and 4-year-olds playing t-ball. And so, like, they're not going to the majors. Like, they're just playing outside. That's the goal. Give them some like body awareness. They're just trying to play, be a part of a team. I watched this mom who was probably overwhelmed and feeling like she was, terrible and losing her mind. And like, this is no shame on her. You could see that she couldn't handle things as they were. And her child was having a really hard time. He was crying. His dad was the coach of this team. He didn't want to do anything. And I think the way he was acting felt like a threat to her. Of like, my son is supposed to be, setting this example and playing this way. And I had this idea of what it was supposed to be. And I watched her shush him. I watched her shame him. Again, I don't think it was intentional. I'm sure with the best intentions, she was overwhelmed. But I am picturing how I do that to myself. That feeling of like, shh, just stop. Just, you're fine. It's not that big of a deal. Get the fuck over it. And I do it. And then I end my day calculating all the ways that I wish I would have said, or I wish I would have done, or why didn't I? And it's those points where then it's the feedback loop. And so my takeaway is like, I want to find out, like, where am I saying shush? Like, just how often do I do that? And so you're already really giving listeners these like beautiful invitations and next steps. But knowing that we are nearing the end, I'm really curious what you would say to the person that's like, okay, I'm here with you. I buy into this. I see this. I'm still afraid. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's on the other side. And my brain is just sure that if I try this, I'm going to fail. I'm going to flail. Everything is going to be worse. How do I even begin to dose myself with enough hope, willingness, self-efficacy, whatever that is, to start to do this work?
Yep.
Because I won't be able to do the practical until I have some of the feelings part done. What would you say
Yes.
to them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first question would be, well, are you willing to find out? Are you willing to
Yeah.
try? Are you willing to dip your toe in? And this is what I always tell my clients. It's like, we're not going to put your most vulnerable post out on the internet on day one. No, no, no. We're going to put an opinion out there that you've thought about. We're going to like ruffle a couple feathers, but we're not going to like go absolutely nuts. As people start to dip their toe in, the experience of being more self-expressed is going to start to reward them. So they're going to start to feel the effects of, and it's not going to go this way every single time, but they're going to start to feel the effects of, oh, wow, that was amazing. Or, oh my God, I've never had a date like that before. I've never had a conversation like that and felt so connected to someone. Or for the business owners listening, it's like, oh my God, I've never had such engagement or so many sales come in so easily. I'm like, yeah, let's go for the dopamine. Like, we don't need to shame the dopamine. Let's go for these little dopamine hits and the felt and lived experience of what it feels like to wear the thing that you've hidden in your closet because you feel like it's like too flashy, or what it feels like to actually say the truth on the internet or share a political belief or whatever it happens to be. Because what I believe people will find as they start to play with this, and again, start small, but notice how you start to feel differently in your own magnetism, and notice how you start to build your confidence around who is repelled. So like, even going back to me saying like, yeah, this is what I do. This is what people appreciate about me. You might have listeners that heard that and they were turned off by me. Totally possible. And you probably also have listeners that were like, damn, I love that she just did that. So I'm going to focus on the ones that loved that I did that, not the ones that were like, ew. Right. And so we get to bring that practice into real life and start with the coffee, start with the restaurant, start with, if they bring you the wrong thing, you actually say something about it. If you're the type of person that doesn't,
Right.
start with these small things that are mostly inconsequential, and see where it takes you. And even with your example of the mom, like, it's like, okay, she was so up in her own stress, but what would it have been like if she turned to another parent or her spouse and said, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed right now? Like, the level of connection possible just in that vulnerability could have
Yes.
been really interesting. Maybe she would have gotten a hug or like, you're doing great, mama, like, we never know where these things are going to go. And it's not easy. And especially we're in the heat of the moment. It's like, I do stuff I regret all the time. It's like, oh shit, I was in the heat of the moment. Wish I'd done that differently, but it's practice.
Yes. 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 I love that. And I love that idea of coming back to what you mentioned so early, which is that community piece. And so
Yeah.
realizing that the witnessing of our shame, she probably still went home at the end of that day and had all of her shame, plus the shame of feeling like she didn't act the way that she wished she would have, or I'm projecting my own stories, but this is how I
Sure.
always go. And it's like, gosh, you were so afraid of looking like you didn't have it together. Perhaps, again, I know we're writing this story for this woman.
Yep.
But what would it have been like if you allowed us to hold that with you? And I feel like every moment I'm able to do that, I do feel more seen. I feel lighter. And I think that allows me to then take what feels like a risk, but in reality, it's just do the things that feel most right to me. And I think then my confidence matches my authentic self. And so it isn't,
Yes.
well, there's magic in the world. And when you stop doing these things or you say these things, like everything's going to be amazing, it's that you just start to filter your experiences in the world differently. And so how
Yes.
I lead each moment feels different. And so,
Yes.
okay, before we go, I know that there is going to be your specialty, and you've kind of alluded to this. You work with entrepreneurs, with the business minded, really helping them think about how to, you use the word adventurous a lot on your website. I love that. And this idea, I
Yeah.
think, of curiosity, exploration, this both internal and external. And there are going to be people listening that are business owners, or they've contemplated leaving that 9 to 5, and they're like, oh my gosh, where has Emily been? I need her. And so what is the best way for anyone on that side to connect with you if they're ready to do the next steps and you are that person for them?
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate the invitation to share. So I would say the best place to find me is on social media. I'm most active on Facebook. I'd love to hear from any of you. Feel free to give me a follow or a friend request, send me a message. I always love connecting with people on this topic. I'm super passionate about it, of course. And yeah, this has been an awesome conversation. And I'm so thankful that you invited me to be here today.
Mm, thank you so much. And listeners, I highly encourage you to check her out. And just, I think even for me, engaging with some of what she said, like, yes, I'm a business owner. There's things for me on that side too, but it's been a lot of opportunity to ask questions. I think one of your gifts, Emily, is that you're able to put them in a very simple way, which clears out the clutter and the noise. So then doing the very difficult work feels less discombobulated and all over the place. I'm able to go, fuck, okay, this is really hard, but also I can do this. And here's really where I want to focus some of my attention. And so I think about that even today with this gift of going, my next step is going to be, how am I still shushing myself? Where do I notice that in my daily life? And that doesn't come with shame and judgment. It comes with curiosity. And so, listeners, all this information is going to be down in the show notes. Of course, if you know someone that could benefit from this episode, please share this with them. If you want to stay in the know on all things untethering shame, whenever a new episode comes out, new content is released, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And of course, we will see you back here next Sunday.